Hello everyone and welcome to the Keen on Yoga podcast. Thanks for listening. Good to have you here. Don't forget, if you haven't reviewed us, obviously with a positive review, then go review it on iTunes or Spotify or whatever. It really helps, as everyone says on the podcast, right? You're bored of that already. Anyway, today it's just me again, and today we're going to talk about short forms. So short forms are kind of heretical in Ashtanga Yoga, because you're meant to do the whole series and the whole series every day. A crazy idea, really, I think. It's not a magic spell. And although it's good, and I think, I haven't come up with a better series yet, so I still keep practicing it, and, it binds us together. There's many reasons why we do this series, which I've explained or suggested on other podcasts. But nevertheless, it's not a ritual to be got exactly right? It's something for you to use, and much of the time, we simply don't have the time, the energy, or even the inspiration to do our whole practice every day. And I think it was never expected that would be the case. My feeling is that Pattabhi Jois was just kind of experimenting on those early students that came. In fact, David Swenson always says the same, that they were the experiment. You remember they used to do the practice twice a day when they first signed up. So it was not like, it's not like he had a fully hatched plan, I think, when they came. And I think he expected a kind of training camp situation where they'd do their own practice and be pushed to the limit, when they came to Mysore, when the students, even when we came to Mysore, right? You go for a few months, you push yourself because you're in a situation where, to be honest, you don't have that much else to do. Well, apart from running around and doing chanting and Sanskrit and all the other kind of extracurricular activities, you don't have job or responsibilities in Mysore. So you can push yourself, right? But then when you go home, I don't think that they ever really expected, that's Sharat or Pattabhi Jois, they never really expected everyone to practice up to that level every day. And I think to be honest, I think to practice, it's like an athlete wouldn't practice to their highest level of their training, their Olympic performance every day. They go to a training camp for a month or two, right? They go, and then they train, then they do their whatever they're doing, right? Their athletics, their sports, and then they live their rest of their 12 months a year doing technique work and keeping their training up and different things, but they don't keep depleting their body. So if you push your body continuously, then what might be building actually starts to deplete. So there's a certain point that stamina actually tips over to depletion, and that's when you continuously keep pushing your body. So I think there's a strong argument for short forms altogether, to be honest, not least because we simply don't have the power of consciousness to spread it over 2 hours a day. Right? And so if you imagine your consciousness is a stamina, your power of your consciousness is not a stamina like everything else. And if you spread that, the wider you spread that net, the wider you cast your consciousness, the less powerful it will be. So the more minutely you spread it, like a microscope, the more you focus that microscope on one or two things, the stronger it is and the more aware you are. That's the same with everyone. It's just the way it is. So I think as I said, there's a really more than a strong argument for short forms. It doesn't mean like being lazy. It doesn't mean amending the practice for the sake of variation or novelty. It's actually just sensible. Actually, it's oftentimes less is actually more. So I think, and I'm notwithstanding the fact that the practice itself that we know as Ashtanga Yoga, it was developed, as we know, for a young Indian body. I mean, Indian is neither here nor there, perhaps, but I do still believe that Caucasian bodies are stiffer than Asian ones, from what I've seen. Generally speaking, broad strokes, of course. But nevertheless, the fact is that it wasn't designed for people going to work, having kids, starting yoga at 35, 40, 50, right? So we have to take that in mind when we approach it. We don't have the energy of a young boy to be jumping around for hours on end. And, of course, we know that in the Mysore Palace, when Krishnamacharya was developing these sequences with the boys, as Dr. Sharma said, who was there as one of the boys, and he's still alive, right? You can ask him this if we ever get to speak to him. We're still trying. And he says, after Surya Namaskar, you were free. You had to do Surya Namaskar as a kind of warm-up, right? It gives you the basic combination of movements in the body, a great combination of movements. After that, you're free to experiment, and Krishnamacharya would allow the boys and develop asanas for each individual. And the early students even had their own experience of this, because once they'd done Pattabhi Jois, what he called his yoga curriculum, they were then allowed in the end to have their own Rishi series. Well, they weren't allowed, they were given apparently their own series of 15 or so postures. Anyway, so That's to say it wasn't given by God. It wasn't set in stone. And when we look at the Yoga Makaranda, Krishnamacharya's book, obviously the sequences aren't there. And the principles are, though, right? That's the point. The principles are there. And the principles are, Krishnamacharya's principles are posture, counter posture, that every posture, and we see a little bit of posture, counter posture left over in the Ashtanga series. When you do a back extension, you might do a forward fold, so your flexion extension go together. I mean, a classic example for me is Kapotasana followed by Supta Vajrasana, which releases the hips after Kapotasana. And then that's just one example of many. Paschimottanasana, Purvattanasana in the primary series, for example. The doesn't follow as much as Krishna. I get too confused. Krishnamacharya's sequences in his book, in the back of the Yoga Makaranda, you really see in evidence posture, counter posture, very, very clear. And you see that in Ashtanga, but less so. Anyway, the fundamental principles that we're looking for that are the basis of what we're doing now, albeit different series that Krishnamacharya recommends, or, he doesn't recommend, he created all different series. Anyway, the fundamental principles are posture, counter posture. I think it's called Prakritiloma Asana. Oh, God, I've forgotten. Sorry. Anyway, there's a name for it, a Sanskrit name for it. Please correct me on that name. And there's individual variation. So sequences developed around an individual body and helping to correct or mend those imbalances in the body and work to the strengths as well. Don't forget that. You should work to your strengths as well as challenge yourself as well. The two things go together. Or as they say, all work and no fun makes Jack a dull boy, in English expression. So you have to work to your strengths as well as work to your challenges and balance the two, right? Anyway, so there's individually variated practice, which is ironic, obviously, as Krishnamacharya gave birth or was instrumental in the most rigid form of a yoga that we now see, Ashtanga Yoga, which is completely homogenized and generalized. He was very, very clear on that yoga should be individual. Yoga should involve counter posture and posture, or posture and counter posture, and the yoga sequence should build. Right? It should build into a kind of what they call peak. I don't like to use the vinyasa terms, but it's a peak posture, isn't it? What they call peak posture. Yeah, and it should build around a particular set of movements, and then kind of, I suppose, gradually tail off the other. So it's like going up to the top of a mountain and tailing off and going down the other side of the mountain. We see that in the series, the Ashtanga series as well, I think, right? In the middle part, the crescendo being Bhujapadasana and Kurmasana. Yeah, maybe Garbha. And the second series, I suppose, well, there's a number of crescendos, isn't it? But it definitely reaches the crescendo around two legs behind head, and then there's a few very tricky postures, and then it kind of goes down the other side of that mountain again. Anyway, so it's three things, really, individually based, posture, counter posture, and a building, some sense of structural incrementalness in it. And the final thing was, of course, vinyasa, which doesn't mean that all the postures have to be in a certain sequence. It rather means entering and exiting a posture with awareness, vinyasa. So there's a certain kind of methodicalness, I think that means. That I think if you understand what I'm saying there, that the posture is entered with a sense of awareness and exited with that same sense of awareness. So it's like it's got a rhythm. Or when you see someone just flopping into a posture, for example, that's not vinyasa. Even if they jump through and jump back, that's not vinyasa, right? So it's just like pause and then into the posture, pause and then out of the posture. That sense of gradual incrementalness or methodicalness or step-by-stepness, that's vinyasa, right? So in my understanding, the sequences that we might design as short forms should suit us, should involve, I think, posture, counter posture, maybe a little bit more than the Ashtanga ones do, because I think that is a little bit of a shortcoming. And they should build to something that we're challenging ourselves with, and then they should ease down and slow down and wind down. Right? And I think they should involve vinyasa, because this is the modern 20th century tool that Krishnamacharya gave us, really, this incremental structuring of a sequence. Before that, as we know, postures were just simply practiced on their own in isolation, not connected and held for much longer periods of time. So those four things, thinking about short forms, right? Here's Krishnamacharya's principles from the horse's mouth, as it were, right? But what it's also trying to do, the yoga, we can't forget, is a tantric method, and it's trying to create intrathoracic pressure, right? So creating this pressure by breathing thoracically, by using bandhas, so you stop the breath going to the lower abdomen and you're breathing thoracically in the practice, stimulates the diaphragm, stimulates the heart. The diaphragm pumps the heart, creates blood flow, stimulates the vital energy in the body, which is very similar to air and blood, prana, that is, So what we're trying to do is create a certain right tension in the body, or pressurize the body, like in tantra, right? You're creating this kind of pressure through the central channel, Sushumna Nadi. So bearing that in mind as well, that we're doing Hatha Yoga, which is a certain forcefulness, a certain pressurizing of the spine, really, or pressurizing of the thoracic cavity where you breathe, using the stretch, using the bandhas, and finally contacting the diaphragm for the breathing. The diaphragm is really the second heart, or it's really the fundamental core of our body, the diaphragm. So thinking about those things when you're practicing, regardless of the sequence, really. And I always say, okay, I love the Ashtanga sequences. I love the Ashtanga tradition, the community, the years that we've all done it now, the history, the old teachers. I love all that. But at the end of the day, I feel I'm just teaching Hatha Yoga, right? It happens that I like that specific style of Ashtanga, but it's all just this particular technique coming through because I happen to enjoy and relish and have done as a kind of ritualized practice these years of a particular sequence. Anyway, so what else can we say about the short forms to convince you to do them? Well, as I said, we all recognize that the body is so different day to day. One of the most injurious things is to try and do the same thing every day in your practice. After all, we're not robots, right? So we need to allow the fact that we're going to get on our mat and do something every day, but that thing should change to reflect the organic living nature of our being. Yeah. And so also, my feeling is doing the whole practice every day, you can easily just get stuck in a rut. As I said, it's also depletive. And I feel that even if you are doing your whole practice every day, some sense of variation should also happen, right? Some sense of, so the variation just kind of sharpens the mind, just as repetition sharpens the mind. Yeah. Too much repetition dulls the mind. And therefore you need to balance a little bit of variation, I think, with that repetition. And the variation, I would say, is often to perhaps do a short form, right? Especially if you're like let's say quote unquote normal person with a normal life, normal amount of energy, right? Not superhuman, and has to give that energy to life. Other people need your energy, work needs your energy, family needs your energy, right? You can't give it all to practice. That would just be a bad idea, not sensible, and not useful, because practice is meant for life, not the other way around, right? Unless you're a tantric yogi living in a cave, simply practicing to transcend the body. If you're practicing to live in life, then we have to acknowledge that our aim is to live a more meaningful, effective, and happy life than gain enlightenment or transcend the body. So if that's our aim, then the criterion has to be, on a daily level, on a weekly level, on a yearly level, does this practice serve me? Is this practice serving me? So we constantly have to amend and modify and make little adjustments and little tweaks to make sure that keeps being the case. And practicing for 2 hours, I think, is ineffective, apart from when you're in the Mysore training camp, if you ever do that, right? Or, now and again when you've got holidays or time and energy, right? Similarly, all the jump backs, right? We've heard before from me and other people that there weren't so many jump backs there when Pattabhi Jois originally taught them. It was a little bit more relaxed, let's say, than the approach to practice. You could jump back, you could not. Generally, the jump backs were between sections of postures, right? And the postures themselves were a little bit more relaxed, right? It wasn't in Supta Kamasana, for example, just to take one example of many. The legs didn't need to go behind the neck. Yeah? They went in front of the head. You just shuffled them from on the ground in front of the head. And there are so many examples of the fact that it was just a little bit more chilled out, first of all, before Westerners came there, started competing with each other and upping the bar constantly in competition with each other. And they even say that themselves, right? They even say that themselves, the old teachers, right? So let's look at the short forms again and try and give you something sensible to go away with, right? And don't feel bad to do a short form, right? It's traditional, as long as it's in fact traditional Hatha Yoga, as long as you're doing this idea of something to do with, let's say, centering the energy, centering and magnifying the energy within you, concentration, attitudinal. It's obviously attitudinal as well. Why you're doing it, trying to keep consciousness clear for the sake of raising your awareness. I mean, let's say very, very broad strokes. What's the reason of yoga? Well, it's the fact of increasing awareness rather than trying to dumb it down. And a lot of life, all of us, we've got this awareness, and it's painful. The awareness of ourselves can be painful. So we constantly try and dumb it down. And yoga is saying, well, no, you're trying to lead a lifestyle based on a practice which is persistently trying to keep aware rather than avoid that awareness with distractions or alcohol or whatever else is your thing, just to dumb that awareness down, because being lucid all the time is painful, right? So it's not so rigid as you have to do to be a traditional Ashtangi, to be a good yogi. You have to do this particular practice every day, so don't feel bad or non-traditional if you feel that you need to do short forms. In fact, it's very sensible. It's always function over form, right? If your function is good, if you're getting the benefits, if you're starting to understand the yoga more deeply, it doesn't matter whether you're doing. In fact, it's less beneficial if you do 2 hours of traditional Ashtanga and you just depleting yourself and you don't enjoy it, than do 30 minutes of a really focused practice where you're starting to get the feel for it, getting the reason why, because you have that energy then, right? Anyways, let's say something more practical about the short forms. Well, first of all, you can see sections in the sequences, in the Ashtanga sequences. You can see certain sections, right? You've got the Jalushishasas, the Marichasanas, right? Before that, you've got a little section of including a few different things, right? Paschimottanasana has got a few variations. Purvattanasana, Ardha Mukha, Tirang Mukha, Ardha Baddha, sorry. Anyway, so you've got these certain sections, right? So pick one from a section or two from a section. One Janushishasana. I mean, one is only necessary anyway, surely. And maybe take a different one each time, right? Or each week, right? And then one Marichasana or two Marichasanas. And then the next section, you've got Bhuja and Karmasana. And let's say maybe let's include Garbha Pindasana with that. So pick one or two from a section. Work on that for a week or two, or vary it day to day. I mean, I originally thought, because of course going to Mysore, you see things practiced in a certain way because it's the ideal time to do it. Let's say it's the ideal conditions. So, people can afford to do the whole thing all the time. And even then, when I first saw this splitting of a practice, so people would start on the second half of primary and go into intermediate, which is a new thing, right? So if you can imagine, right, you do your standing postures up to Parsvattanasana probably. Then you start with Bhuja Badasana. Then you finish the primary series and go into second series, intermediate series. And that comes from Sharat more recently in Mysore, right? Rather than doing half primary and then so you go up from the start of primary to Navasana and then start your second. One day you do that, and the other day you do the second half. So that is a short form in itself. Let's be honest, right? Anyway, so take one of a section, and you can even include some intermediate in that. Either at the end, I would always include some of these early intermediate back bends in your practice, whatever you're doing. Dhanurasana, best posture, Dhanurasana. But then include, maybe if you have time, a few of those early back extensions. And there is a way, I'm going to do a workshop at some point, of kind of intersplicing, like segueing in intermediate and primary, so they go together as one blended series, right? It's possible. Try it, I mean, I think it's good to kind of save one day a week to try and do either the whole of the primary or the whole of the second, as much as you can, just as it is, yeah? There's something in that, I think. There's something in kind of connecting to that tradition that many of us have done, stuck with it, i.e. exactly the same, right? And that is good to preserve just that one day, perhaps. 1 or 2 days, maybe one. It depends what you're doing. If you're just doing primary, then 1 or 2 days just primary, yeah. And then if you're doing primary and intermediate, then 1 day primary, 1 day intermediate, and then 4 days a blend. Let's say, yeah. And vary it. You need the repetition. I think that's essential to have some form of repetition, but you also need the variation, right? And look, even if you're including extra stretches in the practice, in my opinion, as long as you're including the principle of exiting and entering a posture, or entering and exiting a posture with awareness, that's vinyasa. So you're still practicing the traditional Krishnamacharya method, right? And as long as, and more than that, the counting in the first place, I think I've mentioned before, the counting part of it, right? That's not for the sake of a magic and numerology, right? It's not the Kabbalah here. What it is simple. What it is just simply allowing you to understand that the inhale uses the diaphragm's downward motion to lift you, and the exhale, the diaphragm pulls up and in, and that pulls you together. Yeah. So understanding that that's the foundation of the vinyasa idea, use it accordingly. An inhale is always done on a extension, and exhale is always done on a flexion movement. Yeah. So as long as you're using that, then you've got a framework. You've got a framework, right? They're scales, and I think sooner or later these scales have to open up a little bit to variation, albeit that we stay within the Ashtanga tradition. And then when we're in a class, right? When you're in a class, then out of respect of the tradition and the other people doing that, we practice traditionally. Let's say with a small t, right? We don't maybe do our short form in the class unless we've specifically spoken to the teacher and got the okay with that, right? Anyway, so those things said, other than that, I think as Desikachar says in his Heart of Yoga, have to read that book if you haven't, easy read. He says do something dynamic, do a forward fold, do a back extension, otherwise some kind of back bend, yeah? Back extension being back bend, a twisted posture and an inversion, yeah? So a forward fold, something dynamic, back extension, back bend, twist and inversion, yeah? So you just make sure that you kind of cover all bases in your practice, cover all bases, and always end with a good amount of grounding. I would recommend longer in the closing sequence and longer in Shavasana. Right? You need that grounding because, as I said, the creation of the thoracic pressure, using thoracic breathing, is stimulating the nervous system. So you're getting in a light fight or flight response because this is purging trauma. You go back into a kind of arousal to purge trauma. You don't relax trauma by just relaxing, right? You go into that state of fight or flight very mildly under controlled conditions to purge it, to go through it, to release it. And you don't want to keep that state throughout the rest of your day. So you need to take the close. First of all, you need to take the closing sequence as a way to go into parasympathetic nervous system, so grounding. I might suggest try belly breathing there rather than thoracic breathing, which is to stimulate your nervous system. Use belly breathing, right, to release the nervous system and go into rest or digest, parasympathetic, right? So then, and especially do that when you're in Shavasana, right? Put your hands on your stomach, take some deep breaths into the stomach. Yeah, you're not actually breathing from the stomach, of course, but you're going to a different mode of the nervous system, yeah? And you need to come out of your practice back in that rest or digest, that relaxed response, not stimulated, yeah? So you need to ground the nervous system finally, yeah? So saying all that, it's your experiment. There's nothing written in stone. And finally, as I said, you're the proof of the pudding, right? It's what works for you that matters. And the traditional practice is great, but if that tradition is hurting you, if that tradition is not working for you, then it's not traditional. It's not, it's actually, we could say, non-Ashtanga, which is a system which is meant to give you energy, not take it all, right? Leave you feel more grounded, right? Transform you at the end of the day, right? We're using the practice still for some degree of transformation in our life, So, yeah, we come up with this idea of navigating tradition as always. What's traditional, and trying to kind of tread that fine line between being completely squashed by tradition, by fitting ourselves like they say, a square peg in a round hole, and using tradition for our own benefit, right? And I think if we look at the early practitioners and their experience of the way Pattabhi Jois taught, he was a lot more experimental, let's be honest. He had the curriculum pinned up against the wall of his first shala, but it was an experimenting process, right? There's many examples of that. Like the headstands of the second series that David Williams got given. They were never in the second series, those last headstands. For example, one example of many, right? And again, you can see these conversations on the blog posts on our website. I've written a couple of blog posts that post the original curriculum and talk a little bit about the changes. Anyway, just to say that, these weren't written on stone tablets and passed down through the ages or banana leaves either. This is This is a man-made thing, and it works, but it only works if you amend it to suit your energy day to day. As I said, the body is an organic system. It's not a robot, so it changes day to day. You know that, yeah? And you've got to like it. You've got to enjoy it, right? If your mind is closing down or getting dulled through repetition, you've got to break it up somehow, yeah? If it's not working now, or if, right, just like if you're in pain now, or if it's not working now, it's likely not going to work in the middle or the end either. In other words, if it's not working now, it's not going to work in the future. So you have to make changes, right? And one thing is letting us off the hook and saying, well, I do 30 minutes of quality practice rather than drag myself through an hour and a half of my, in inverted commas, whole practice every day because I ought to do that, because I'm not committed enough if I don't do that, which is just rubbish, right? Commitment is about an attitude. It's about motivation, enthusiasm, to enthuse, to take in, theos, God, right? It's a Greek word, right? Inspiration, to breathe in, to breathe in and take in, right? To inspire, right? This is what we're talking about, to be able to focus on the nature of energy running through the body with the breath and feel inspired, feel enthused by it, feel in love with the practice. Not that it's something to beat ourselves up or validate our condition every day, or just do it and tick that box off and say, okay, I've done my practice, so everything is right with the world. It's easy to use it as that kind of superstitious ritual, or that we ought to do that, right? There's no ought in this, right? At the end of the day, life is short and we don't know what's happening after. So use it to enjoy, use it to raise your awareness, use it to give you energy in life, give you inspiration in life, and not just to close you down and make you miserable. That was never the idea. So feel free to do the short forms if you ever want to check in with me on your short form, and they should vary as well. I think you should come up with a few short forms, right? Not just one. Vary it, keep it varied. And now I think if you listen carefully, your body will just naturally guide you in certain places. But keep the vinyasa approach. I think that's really important, to build up step by step and keep the rhythm, keep that sense of rhythm, right? And maybe make a plan before you start. So you're not just waiting, what shall I do next? So you just make a list. Okay, I'm going to do this one, this one, this one, this one, and make a list, right? And see how long that takes you. And then you can amend it, yeah? The only bad practice is one you'd regret, and I don't think you'd regret a practice. And the only mistake is one that you don't amend, right? So even if it doesn't feel good or quite right, it's only mistaken if you keep doing that same thing again and again. Otherwise, it's just a learning process, and that's how we learn, right? It's not a mistake; it's just part of learning. If it doesn't feel quite right, and it won't. Right? So, let me know what you think, as usual. Comment if you like. And meet me somewhere. Come to a retreat or come to a workshop. I'd love to meet you, and we chat more about this stuff and all kinds of yoga related stuff. You can see all that on my website. And if you'd like me to come somewhere and meet you, and you happen to be in the position of knowing a yoga studio that would like to invite me, or have one yourself, then just get in touch, and maybe next year I'll have time in the schedule. It's a busy one this year, but maybe next year I can come and see you. Anyway, bye for now, and next week we'll have a guest again, so look forward to that. Let me know how you like this, and I'll see you soon again. Bye for now.